Okay, so here we go, Penny. It's very strange doing this over the screen, isn't it?
Yes, it most certainly is.
Yeah.
My mind's gone blank already.
That's all right, don't worry. Don't worry. So I actually don't know how you started in genetics.
Don't you?
No,
right.
I don't.
Right. So back in the dawn of time, I moved from another city to Nottingham, and I'd been in nursing for a number of years, and I wanted to continue in nursing. But by that time, I'd already decided that I wanted to know about things in depth rather than breadth. Mm-hmm. So I felt I wanted to work in a specialty, but I wasn't really sure what that was, and nor did I know what would be available at that time in Nottingham. And I'd done a diploma in nursing, which included some genetics, and I was quite interested in that. And at the time, an advert came out for a specialist nurse in genetics in Nottingham, in a clinical service that had been up and running for, I think, probably might be 6 years, something like that. So it was already set up as a clinical genetics service within the NHS. And probably quite unusually at that time, it wasn't linked to any academic department. So it was purely about service delivery. Yeah. And I was very inspired by the people I met there, a small team of people who came over as really enthusiastic and motivated to deliver a patient-focused service, which was what I'd always been interested in. So whilst I was uncertain about whether I had the attributes or knowledge or anything to do with joining that service, I was so inspired by the people I met and the philosophy they seemed to have that I thought, right, I'll go for it. And I got the post. So that was in 1983.
Okay. Yeah. So sort of early to mid 80s.
Yes.
Yeah.
And at that time, at that time, I really knew very little about what else was going on in the country. Were there other people like me in posts? And I discovered, well, yes, there were, but very few. And what they were doing was very disparate. So everybody was delivering a service of some kind within a team, medically led. But exactly what we were doing, and perhaps at that stage why we were doing it in that way, was certainly not evidence-based, and as I say, was quite disparate. Yeah. So I suppose I was fortunate in that there was already 2 other people in specialist nursing posts there. One.
And who were they?
Who were they? They were Beth Fitzsimmons. And,
I remember her name, yes.
And Val Saldua.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, and the team was led by the geneticist who was coming at it from a paediatric background, and he was John Fitzsimmons.
Right, okay.
And then there were other medics that were working part-time. So very, very small team, but a team that was extremely supportive, valued everybody's contribution, and if you just felt that you could get on with the job, whatever that might be. And at the time I joined, I didn't really know what the job was. So there was a lot of following other people and gathering an impression both of what they were doing, but to some extent why they were doing it. What were the families saying? What were they needing? How were they accessing the service, etc. So a hell of a lot of observation for quite a period.
Right. I mean, what resources did you use to learn about genetics, or did you just sort of pick it up?
Well, as I say, I had studied genetics for a diploma. Which was part of a course that I'd done previously. So I did know a bit about basics, but a kind of orientation program was arranged for me, which included going to it was cytogenetics. There wasn't a molecular genetics department at that time. It was pre a lot of DNA work.
So how did you did a lot of observation?
I did a lot of observation, and I was also afforded a lot of time to delve into the literature, and we did have a pretty good departmental library.
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff was available to me about genetics itself. Yeah. Not a lot about psychosocial aspects of genetics, because in the UK at that time, there really wasn't much of a literature base in that side of things. And it wasn't till later that I knew that there was a big literature base, mainly states-based, and that was like a light bulb getting into that.
So were you involved right at the beginning with the AGNC, Association of Genetic Nurses?
No, the AGNC didn't.
Oh, GNASWA.
None of that existed.
Right,
what happened was that already in existence, I think annually, the few people that were doing this kind of work did get together. So this was the non-medical people. So what we would now call genetic counsellors did get together to share experiences, cases, that sort of thing. Fairly informal, certainly not presentation of papers.
Yeah.
So that happened. And also, I think probably within other regions, certainly in the region I worked, the different centres did get together. So that was medical and non-medical people getting together.
Yeah.
There were more formal presentations about things, but not usually by what we'll now, I'll just refer to people as genetic counsellors because that's how they evolved. But they weren't called that at the time. So I did then meet up with other people and could see that we had a lot of shared experiences, but there was no kind of framework within which we worked.
Yeah.
And a number of us felt that we should formalise the annual get-togethers, and out of that evolved the Genetic Nurses and Social Workers Association as it was then, because most of the people in post were coming from particularly health visiting, but various branches of nursing, but also some social workers. And I can't remember the exact time scale. There was this wonderful person called Lauren Curzon-Storer, who was a legitimate genetic counsellor who had been trained in the States. And I mean, she introduced me to so many ideas and got me into an evidence base for what we were doing, in as much that there was. And I suppose also at that time, when the Genetic Social Workers Association began, it was a very loose structure, but I don't like disorganisation. So quite soon, I actually chaired that group of people.
I remember that.
So that must have been around the time that you joined. That was 88, I think, wasn't it?
88, 89, yes.
Yeah. But the other person around that time who was now in post, but subsequent to me being in post, was Sally Varnish.
Yeah.
In Leicester, she was based. Now, Sally was coming towards the end of a fairly dynamic professional career within nursing, where she had studied the roles of various types of nursing personnel and had formalised the research base for those posts. And she really shook us up about how we needed to take ourselves more seriously, to be professional. And in particular, I can remember her saying, why do we have all these doctors delivering lectures when we have our genetic nurses meetings? We should be doing this for ourselves. So that was quite inspirational. And I think a number of us from that did kind of gather ourselves and try to get to grips with formalising and professionalising what we were doing so that we could demonstrate to others, particularly employers, but also other specialties, that we were working at a particular level and should be credited for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose that was the stepping stone there then for a huge growth period within the profession.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I can remember meeting you, I think, and Sally, actually. I thought Sally was an amazing person, absolutely amazing. I can actually remember her. I think it was my first meeting of the sort of sisterhood and brotherhood as we felt then, because it was very small numbers. And she did just stand up on a platform and berate us and say, basically say, it's in your hands.
Yes,
you have to get on and do this.
And fortunately, there were a few of us who grabbed it.
Yes, yeah.
Made sure that we grew as a profession. But within that, we also needed to grow as individual practitioners and to understand more of the impact of what we were doing and how did that meet patient needs, which hopefully it did, but we couldn't demonstrate it.
No. I think it's better, but it's still an issue today. We need to carry on developing the evidence base, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
We do, yes. Yes, and I mean, some people did follow a research pathway from within practice, and that was excellent. But there were also a lot of other researchers that were looking at what was genetic counselling, what were the outcomes, etc., etc. And increasingly, those were based in the UK, whereas previously we were drawing on the American literature base,
yes,
of which there was a plethora, and the doyen of that was Seymour Kessler.
Right.
When I actually firstly read what he was saying, I thought, this just rings true. This is it.
Yes.
And then I was fortunate to go to one of his workshops, and that was just amazing. And it kind of legitimized some of the feelings that I had within about what we were doing.
Yes. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to go to a workshop in Manchester, and it was, as you said, it was amazing. It was a sort of aha moment. This
it was.
This is what we're doing, and we can do it better if we understand it better.
If we understand it better, but we can't extract his philosophy totally because he's got a totally different context.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to contextualize what we're doing here in the UK, working within a very different health service, etc. So it was just, there was so much one could extract and develop the kind of eclectic armory that we needed to support our practice, and so much did come from him.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I can remember meeting you at that course in Wales, and I think that was the first time, and I was reflecting on that with one of the other interviewees, and we both said the same thing. We said something like, well, Penny Guilbert would come up to you and say, "Oh, you look interesting. Would you like to be the secretary, treasurer?" Suddenly, without knowing anything about it really, you found you were.
Yes, but I suppose that's what happened to me when I first went into that department. And I think if someone believes in you, you start to believe in yourself. Actually, I was going to reflect on something else that happened early on. Working with Dr. Fitzsimmons was, it was an inspiration because he promoted the breadth of what was needed in delivering a patient-focused service, which included what genetic nurses were doing at that time. But also for me personally, after feeling pretty insecure for quite a while, coming into this alien department and specialty, at some point he wanted me to do the field work on a cohort of patients that he felt had a condition that was probably inherited. Mm-hmm. So that meant that I was going into families, usually in their homes, interviewing them about a subject that was actually quite difficult for them because it wasn't a sort of condition they wanted to share with people.
Right.
And really getting to grips with how they felt about things, what were their fears, what were their aspirations, and all of that, all mingled in with collecting family history information, which is really how we did meet people and learned how they ticked, and therefore how we could help them best. And by doing that, for which I was credited on the paper that ensued, that really gave me so much confidence that I could do these things both with families, and I did have something to offer within the department. And that led later on to me going back into the Duchenne muscular dystrophy families. Remember that we were in a time where there was certainly very little in the terms of specific mutations known. And we were working through linkage. So I was looking at the whole cohort that we'd ever known in Nottingham of muscular dystrophy families and going back into them and talking to them about the possibilities that now your daughters wouldn't be looking at terminating all boys, which was what they were left with if they chose to do that. There might be some bit more definition in what we can offer. And I learned so much from those families.
Yes. Yeah, I think we had the privilege of really not being involved, the wrong word, sorry, being able to listen to the real experiences of people's lives,
Really
like
listening.
seeing them at home. Yeah. And having time to do it.
Having time to do it, and we certainly did at that time, which was great.
Yes.
But also so important to be able to go back. Remember, this was generally speaking a medically delivered service within the health service, and report the findings and be listened to, and also to be allowed to write in the medical records.
Yeah, not have it countersigned by.
So that was really interesting. Yeah. The link to that, a bit later on, Dr. Fitzsimmons retired at one time, and there was a bit of a vacuum then before someone else was in post. So that meant that the doctors who were part-time in the department were covering, if you like. But we were doing much more because the service needed to be delivered. And it became, I suppose, just gradually evolved that some of those simple cases, we'll say, could be dealt with just by a genetic counsellor. But that meant that one had to write a letter back to the referring person, which was not a problem to me. But I can remember being told by a medical colleague, well, this is all correct, but you can't send that. You sound like a consultant. So, I think probably a lot of us experience some kind of, not jealousy, but, well, what these people, they seem to be able to do some of what we're doing ourselves. Is this a danger, or what is it? Yeah.
No, it remains a challenge, I think, but it was a challenge, yes.
Yeah.
What you did for me was give me confidence that I could go into committee work and commission work and could just be there.
Yes.
And be able to be there.
And did it very ably, I have to say.
Thank you. But if you hadn't given me that first, it's as you say, it's belief. Penny said I could do it, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and I was fortunate in having someone that identified I could do something.
Yeah,
and indeed, when that person retired, it was really me that was left to lead, organise whatever the service, which is really how I got into being a service manager eventually, which was not a comfortable path, but an important path to enable the service to continue.
Yes. So how about other people that influenced really sort of the development of genetic counselling?
Development of
you?
Yeah. Well, with so few people around at the beginning, that's difficult to pinpoint because you didn't see other people very much. But I think that I did appreciate the fact that there were some clinicians, medical geneticists, who appreciated that there was a role for greater breadth and depth into managing families, dealing with families in a way that they would get something from it. And that couldn't happen with just a single appointment. So particularly, I think probably I'd mentioned Peter Harper, who I knew realised that, but a number of other people too in the various departments, because we're then going into, the late 80s when you came into post, and an awful lot of departments were employing genetic nurses, counsellors, however you view them. So, I did appreciate that Peter Harper was a leader in the field of a broad service which encompassed genetic counselling in the more widely understood context that we use the word. The other thing that I suppose that I realised too from that department was, because he had a big interest in Huntington's disease, he had seen fit to employ someone that was a family care worker for that group of patients. And I had already twigged that we weren't the be-all and end-all of what families needed. Many of them in these, really ongoing conditions that were not going to get any better, needed support long-term. And so realising that they'd set that up in Cardiff, over the years, I then managed to get a Huntington's coordinator post going for the Nottingham area. So that was an inspiration too.
Yes.
But from within the profession, so to speak, who were the motivators and stimulators for me, they evolved later with people like you, like Heather, like Lauren, and a number of other practitioners that we have worked with over the years, who became as committed as me, had many skills that they brought into the development of the profession. So I don't think I can really pick out individuals other than what I've said.
Yeah, yes. What do you think were the critical sort of points that moved the development of the profession on?
Move the profession on. I think the fact that we did start to take ourselves more seriously. We did start presenting at conferences our own material, presenting posters, etc., etc. And I can't remember the dates when this happened, but you were there. And at one point, there was a lot of discussion. We had by then become the AGNC, the Association for Genetic Nurses and Counsellors. I'll go back to that in a minute, but we had become that. And there was a realisation within the genetics community that laboratory, academic, research staff, deliverers of the service needed to get together and have what became British Society for Human Genetics. And I think there was a huge impact of the AGNC and the people in it being treated as equal partners in developing that. And that just continued, and that growth continued. So we'd worked to a level where we were taken seriously by the other people that delivered genetic services or who researched into them. And we were thereafter going to be an equal partner in the development of whatever happened subsequently. I was going to go back to something then, but I can't remember what it is. Oh, yes, I know what it was. I mentioned Lauren previously. The other great thing that Lauren did was to establish I've lost the words.
The Masters.
The Masters.
Yeah.
The Masters in Genetic Counselling, which did mirror, but was UK based, but it mirrored the training that she had got and others had got in the States. So, that was a big step forward, because you then had people coming into the profession who were well grounded in most of the aspects. They may not have had the experience, but they were grounded in most of the aspects of what the genetic service was supposed to be delivering. And at that time, I didn't see that much of her, but we did talk quite a lot. And within the what was GNUSWA and then the AGNC, she and I particularly realised, well, here we've got two streams of people, those coming from from nursing, and those coming from the master's course. We must not divorce these two. We must not polarise it. We must keep this together. And that was really important.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it was absolutely crucial, and it's still crucial, particularly now when we've got this other strand coming in with this different training, funded training posts as well, training schemes.
Yeah.
There's too much work to do, and there's too few of us to waste time in. We're doing the same things. We're trying to achieve the same ends.
Yeah, but I think you and I and others really took that and ran with it. Yeah. And we set up that education working group, and we did so much work within that to provide a framework of, well, what did competence look like in this field, and what did you need to achieve it? And of course, that eventually resulted in getting registered.
Yes, and of course you were the first chair of the board.
I was, yes. Yeah. I was. I did enjoy that so much.
All right. What did you enjoy about it?
I enjoyed working with quite a diverse group of people who were bringing different ideas to it. Really useful to have external people as well as genetic counsellors on that board. And the difficulty of working out how were we going to assess the portfolio of people's life work, really, because most of these people had been working in it for ages. And here we were going to have to critique this.
Yeah.
But what I found was, and people did have different ideas, and I suppose the people who were going to need to register didn't always fall into it as a welcome thing. It was seen very much as a challenge, and there was resistance to it in some ways, in many quarters. But as it started to be put into practice, so to speak, I learned so much about practice and the value of the people that were delivering it. It was just wonderful going to talk to people about how they had, about their work, and enabling them to express how they felt about it and how they felt they were doing.
Yeah, because of course in the beginning everybody had an interview, didn't they?
They did have an interview. Yes. I thought that was wonderful.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, it was like a Viva in other contexts, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, all that happened when I was off doing my PhD and postdoc. So I then had to register after I went back in as the consultant genetic counsellor at Guy's. I thought, well, I better get registered then.
yes, that's right. Yeah. I mean, an awful lot of water under the bridge, really, over the 90s.
Yes.
In 90s, an awful lot of things happened.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to think about the fact that it wasn't only in our practice. All those things were going on in parallel in terms of technology, both within genetics, within prenatal work, in many other avenues,
Yes.
and that what we were doing had to work in parallel with that and encompass all of that as we went along.
Yeah, and working. I mean, the cancer. I can't remember what the years were again, but I used to use a teaching slide where I showed how many appointments we used to see for cancer genetics at one time, which was basically familial polyposis coli, and that was about it.
Yes.
It was 60% of the genetic cancers workload.
Yes, that's right. Yes, and of course that did change practice within the delivery services because in many instances it was genetic counsellors that dealt with that side of the work.
Yes, yeah, which was appropriate.
Yes.
Because it didn't involve a medical diagnosis, it didn't involve a medical examination, it was about risk and helping people manage their risk.
Yes, and dealing with the fact that you could have a presymptomatic test.
Yes.
And what a can of worms that was.
Yeah.
Particularly to outsiders who couldn't see that, okay, there's a test. Well, you have a test. Of course you have a test.
Yes.
And trying to uphold the rights of people not to have a test.
Yes. Yeah. Or to say not now, maybe next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. That was really important, and I think wasn't part of how a medic ticks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the people that were working in the specialty uphold that.
Yes.
I think other specialties just could not understand that.
No.
And I suppose that takes us into the aspect of needing to educate other healthcare professionals, not only about genetics, but about genetics and its psychosocial aspects and how that is just as important as information giving, doing a test or whatever it is you're going to do. And I guess there was quite a lot of places where people thought they could do it in their own specialty and that they didn't need the genetic service. So that, I suppose, that kind of led in two directions from people like us, where you needed to take on a much bigger educational role to influence their practice, but also you needed to develop the working relationships with other departments so that the patient got the best of both worlds, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's particularly so in the cancers, I think.
Yes, it's particularly so now as well. In the sort of genomic world that we're entering into.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's I personally feel incredibly privileged that my career was bookended by the first expansion of genomics and of genetics. It wasn't genomics then in the 80s, and that workforce expansion. But we really did more of the same. We still had no real, ways of affecting the course of inherited diseases so much then. But it was a huge expansion of volume. And this last bit of my working life it's the next phase. It is shifting. It is a turn.
Yes.
But with people like you and all other people that we won't mention, and we can't remember their names because of that kind of thing.
Absolutely, I'm glad you said that.
But I feel that those of us of this, we should be really proud of the foundations we built.
Oh, I do feel incredibly proud of it.
Yeah.
And that isn't only, it's certainly not solely due to me. It's about a group of people who were so committed and had the vision to see what we needed to do to improve things and to go about implementing that.
Yes.
The other thing that follows on from that, as you know, I was a service manager as well as being a practitioner. So I think that I realised very early on that we couldn't exist in isolation. We had to fit in to the health service frameworks, however uncomfortable that might be. Yeah. So, I had to communicate with the nursing structure within my own employing authority. And I was fortunate enough to also be privy to going to what were the resource meetings with originally the regional health authorities and then the area health authorities. And then, of course, we got into commissioning in all the various changes in that. But you had to react to that because you had to make it work to enable you to continue delivering the service. And that I was working quite a lot with the public health people locally then, and we developed a specification for the delivery of genetic services locally. And I really think that was an important step.
Yes.
But of course, change came ultimately. And then there were things like GenCAG, and I was fortunate to go on that as an advisor about the genetic counselling needs of families, which that all affected the commissioning for the future. And then ultimately, the green paper about our inheritance, our future, which then became a white paper. And to have me as a representative of genetic counsellors, we'd really arrived. We were at the seat of strategic thinking.
Yeah, we were at the table.
We were at the table.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is huge.
Yes, it was.
It arrived.
We arrived. I think in retrospect, the white paper was early. It was too early. You couldn't realise it's the agenda.
Yeah. No, but it did have resource implications because after that, I was able to secure 3 new posts in our department because of the money becoming available.
Yeah.
You had to fight for it, but...
Yes, yeah. I think it's a really important thing that people have to realise that you do, if you're going to effect change, you have to engage with the organisations that are responsible for delivering.
You do.
And sometimes you have to sort of try and understand the levers you can pull, because you won't get everything you want.
No.
And nor should you,
You have to learn to play that game.
Yeah.
And and I thought that was a very important aspect. And I felt locally it was enabling the service to continue as we saw fit in its development. And I had to probably suffer a few things to actually bring that back to the grassroots. It did mean that it was a smoother passage for everybody else involved.
Yes.
And then more widely, it did affect change and development for genetic services generally. Yes.
I mean, I know you've been having your other life for quite a long time now.
Yes, quite a long time. Yes.
Have you been an observer of what's been happening since, or have you not? Have you sort of...
Initially, I did know quite intimately what was going on because I was actually married to a scientist in genetics. So I did for a while. And I did maintain links with some people still working for a while. Well, I suppose because of links with the British Society for Human Genetics as an officer and AGNC, I still get their if you like. So I am in touch in that way, but not really in a big way at a personal level. But I suppose, interestingly, I've always been fairly reflective about who I am and what I'm doing. And so I was quite clear about what I needed to do to move from being such an obsessive practitioner in genetics into a life where I didn't have a framework. So in fact, I recognised that I had skills, but I also had needs. And so I went into being a volunteer with the Citizens Advice Bureau.
Right, yes.
So a different framework, but very similar skills that I could use, transferable skills, and a totally different knowledge base.
Yes. Yes.
I say a knowledge base, but in that kind of field, you never know anything, actually, because it's changing all the time. So you have to be used to going into the up-to-date literature to glean the correct information to be able to deliver that service. So there are many things I was used to that I could transfer into that.
Yes. Yeah. I think that, sort of reflecting on preparing genetic counsellors for practice, a big bit of it is that you'll never hold all the knowledge in your head.
Yeah.
Because it's impossible. If you're dealing mainly with rare diseases, for example, there's just too many of them to know the specifics. But what you absolutely have to know is what you don't know and where to find out.
Where to find out, and who else might help in signposting that particular family to get what they need to be able to live with Blog's disease.
Yes.
And the big role that self-help groups brought.
Yes.
That, many of those developed over the 90s, I suppose.
Yes. So we've covered a lot in your usual reflective manner, Penny. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to sort of say or comment on? Or it's such an amazing working life you had.
Yes, I consider I was very fortunate, but perhaps I made the most of the opportunities that were available. Probably not for myself, but the profession and the service as a whole.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think when I think about my professional role, I consider I was an enabler in many senses of that word.
Yeah, no, you were.
I think you have said that, but in the wider context, I think I enabled families to get the best that we could offer from a referral to a specialist service in a way that they could access. So I was enabling in that sense. I know that I enabled my team to achieve, and I know that they've remarked on that in other places. And I know that I enabled the profession to get to where it is or where it was.
Yeah, and all that's true. And I guess that's, if I'm thinking about practice, in a way that's the essence of our practice, because we are only involved in such a small part of people's lives.
Yes.
And we can't take away what they're dealing with.
No.
But what we want to do is enable them.
To live with it.
Yes, to live with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
In whatever small way we can.
Once you realise that, you're halfway to enabling it.
Yes. Yeah.
I think possibly if you think about nurses, in many contexts, they think they can fix things and make it better.
Yeah.
And you can't do that in genetics. So you've got to learn that one.
Yes. Yeah, you've got to learn to sit with it.
Yeah. Yes. And having said that, I know there was one other thing I was going to say, because when you move into anything new, you have transferable skills, but also transferable
modus operandi.
Modus operandi, that's the one. And from my nursing, I was fortunate to work with a sister. I was a staff nurse and worked with this woman who advocated that you sat down with patients. This was medical, so it was chronic conditions often.
Yeah.
And you listened to them. And you tried to help them with their fears and their adjustment and getting on with life despite whatever it was. So that was a very important transferable message that I could take to dealing with families on my caseload.
Yeah. Well, This has been so lovely to speak to you, Penny. It's been so nice.
You have no idea how much I've tried to sort of read around and think about things in preparation for this. And I don't think I've probably mentioned half of what I thought I was going to.
Okay. Well, I mean, if anything comes to mind, we can always do another film. We can always do this again. Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's been nice talking to you. And it has been quite nice getting back in touch with what I spent so many years doing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was such a huge part of it appeared from the outside that it was a huge part of your life. You weren't just, I remember somebody who I won't tell you who it was, when I started in genetics said, "Oh, it's a nice little job, Christine. You don't have to work weekends." And,
Yes.
and yeah, it became much more of some people's lives than others, I think.
Yeah. Yes, and it depends what was going on elsewhere in life, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just part of my characteristics, I think, that whatever I do, I'm committed to. So
yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else has come to mind?
Not immediately, no.
Not immediately. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, there was one thing, because I told you how important I thought Seymour Kessler was, and I was just looking at something here, and at the end of this book, he says, "I look back at my involvement in the field of genetic counselling with considerable satisfaction," which I do. This is Seymour Kessler, by the way. "Yet self-doubt remains. Have I made an impact? Have I left a legacy? And he says, perhaps I need to comfort myself with the belief that I've left something solid behind." So I feel that too.
Yes. Yeah. And you did.
But in a different way.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that's an amazing quote.
Yeah. Amazing man.
Yes. Yeah. The other person that has also, anyway, I never knew Robert Rester. Did you know of Robert Rester?
No.
Oh, right. I never knew him not of him until recently. And he's just done one of his blogs and said he's leaving. He's also retiring. And
is he?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, because he edited this particular thing from the essays of Seymour Kessler.
Yes. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. So who's going to interview you, Chris?
I don't know yet. I might get Anna to, or I might not. I'm just an invisible presence.
Well, it's been perfectly comfortable doing this with you.
Good. That's good.
Yes.
Good, I'm pleased.
So are you going to do others?
I'm going to do Lauren. So I've spoken with Penny, Chris Barnes, Heather, Chris Barnes, Lauren, and obviously yourself. Is there anybody you think that I should really speak with? It's a problem because you know who you know, but you don't know who you don't know.
No, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I think those are the key people in terms of driving the profession forward.
Yes.
A lot of brilliant practitioners.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. I started really with that group that we didn't talk about this at all. That when we met in that hotel in London to write the registration process.
Yes.
I sort of started with who I could remember was at that. And I remember Diane Sterling.
It was Anne Kershaw.
Oh yes.
Yes, but she's retired.
Yes, she is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Diane Sterling is nearly retired. Amazing enough.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, so many people we have met and worked with.
I know.
Really interesting.
I know. And you think of the centres and you think of the work they did at Birmingham as well. Really interesting work around the ethnicity and thalassemia screening.
I don't know. No, I'll have to be a little more non-specific about this, but Birmingham didn't have any genetic nurses when, in the early to mid 80s, and they appointed two, but they weren't sure what they were What should they be doing?
Yes.
So they got sent to Nottingham to see how it was done.
How it worked.
How it works, yes. But some of the things that they had, the expectations that future colleagues there had of what they would be doing were bizarre.
Yeah, we won't mention the centre, but we all know which one it was, where the genetic nurse's role was to change the paper towel on the clinic beds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, there's that, yes. That's probably a little bit earlier.
Yes. I don't know. It was going on when I was around.
Yes.
Not now, though.
I've just thought of a whole avenue that I haven't mentioned.
Okay.
Do you want me to?
Yes.
So I suppose late 80s, there was the European meetings about the psychosocial aspects of genetics, and that widened my view of what genetic counsellors were doing or not doing. In particular, I think the people who were in the Netherlands, who were working in multidisciplinary teams, but very much individual practitioners within those teams. Mm-hmm. And that gave me a new thought into how some of that might be transferable. And of course, that definitely was drawing on the work of researchers and practitioners in the field who were delivering academic papers or review papers or, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that was... that was very helpful to be able to access that.
Yes, and it was a tremendous forum for the sort of psychosocial research to get presented.
Yes.
And I think because of the involvement of the academic psychologists and sociologists as well, it was a very high standard. It was quite academic at the beginning, yes.
It was. Jerry Gibbons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very talented woman.
Yes, very. Very. And then, of course, wonderful artisan. But anyway,
yes,
the story of the European world is a different story to tell.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
We didn't.
Your eyes were gradually opened to so many possibilities.
Yes, and I don't suppose anybody's ever really mentioned it in the other interviews, but the sort of psychology world in the UK as well, with Therese Marteau and Susan McGee and people like that, was influential.
It was, because they were really looking at outcomes and what was going on.
Yes, and it was an uncomfortable read sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was. No, I thought they were very important.
Yeah.
Yes, well, it all came together, didn't it, eventually?
Yes,
it's still coming together.
It's still coming together, but it's really it's exciting at the moment. But anyway, you probably won't be aware of this. What is really interesting is that mainstream nursing and genetics is right up the agenda. And there's this huge, you might be aware, there's this huge reorganisation going on about laboratories and genomic medicine. And I know it's caused a lot of upset and grief. But within one of the new structures being set up, the board has to have a nurse on it, not a genetic counsellor. And actually the medical member of the board doesn't have to be a geneticist. So the AGNC is now encouraging, this is just in England, the AGNC is encouraging genetic counsellor managers to engage with their nursing management.
Yeah.
It
was always important.
Yeah.
You couldn't just go off at some tangent.
No. You couldn't.
And I know, well, certainly when I was working with one particular, whatever they were called at that time, the senior nurse in the hospital, she really welcomed my input at what were then called senior nurse managers meetings, because I had a different perspective on things and I made them think about things in a wider way.
Yes, but also for the specialist genetic practitioners who some of them became quite isolated in their departments. They were, they were a lovely department working very well, delivering great service. but in complete isolation from the rest of the healthcare system.
Yeah.
And so they lost the view of what was going on in the wider system.
They did, and it became actually potentially quite dangerous because you were also outside all the governance strategies, etc.
Yeah. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
That didn't happen around me.
No, it wouldn't. And you don't have to.
You didn't have to fight hard sometimes.
Yeah, I must say, I never wanted a management role, and then I ended up choosing to take one, which was great, and it was a wonderful experience for 10 years. But I can remember, anyway, this is not relevant to this. I remember in the interview, though, I think I ended up saying to them, if you want a manager, you probably don't want me, because I can develop those kind of very detailed management skills. But if you want a leader of your department and the professions in your department, then yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
If you want a manager, you want somebody different to me.
Yeah. I guess probably I could keep those strands together.
Yeah. I could. The management one was what I didn't like. Anyway, that's a separate story.
Yeah, well, I think always management roles may well go against your gut feeling as what was right.
Yes. Yeah. No, they're tough.
So you've got to have that diplomacy embedded in you. Yeah,
and that ability to deal with the pressures coming from both beneath you in the structure and above you in the structure, and only letting a bit of it through into your actual bit you're in charge of.
Yeah, I recognise that.
Yes.
Yes. Well, this has been very enjoyable.
I've really enjoyed it, Penny. Thank you so much. And if you've got any worries or anxieties or think of anything else, then just contact me or Lauren.
Yes, I mean, as you're doing it, you don't really realise, have I covered this, that and the other?
Yes, yeah.
I think we've been far enough, really.
Yeah, and it's really, what I wanted to collect was just conversations, not a detailed timeline. Sort of conversations and narratives and stories.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, and you can't remember. Yes.
Yeah.
Or as I realised when talking to Chris, although we may have lived through much of the same period, we had completely different recollections of it.
Really? Yeah. It is interesting.
Yeah. Or assumed, she was involved in something and she wasn't, and she insisted I'd been involved in something and I insisted I hadn't. But we might, either of us could have been right, of course.
Yes. I was interested. You said about how I'd approached you to be. I think it was secretary of the whatever.
The secretary of the And if you hadn't done that, I would not have eventually ended up on the Human Genetics Commission, and I would have not have ended up being president of the ESHG.
I know. Because
I wouldn't have learned how to do it.
Yeah.
And you enabled
the belief again that you could do it. Yeah. Yes,
and
we all need that.
And the understanding that that you see all these organisations, but it's just people that are on the board. Just people with strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That actually all those people will have some validity in what they're saying. Absolutely. And deserve respect, and that you demand respect for yours.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you taught me that.
Oh.
You can take that away with you.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Okay, Penny.